You're listening to Seminary Dropout, episode 42, and I'm your host, Shane Blackshear. This week, I'll talk about the first ever Seminary Dropout survey and how you could win a t-shirt, a Seminary Dropout t-shirt. Also, we'll talk to one of the hosts of Homebrewed Christianity's Culture Cast, Christian Piatt. All right, let's go. And welcome, friends. Thanks again for joining me for Seminary Dropout. As always, I've got a fantastic show for you. I want to talk a little bit about this survey that I put together. I put together the first ever Seminary Dropout survey. The purpose of it is to make the show better. I always want to make it better. And so I'm asking for a little bit of feedback and to give you just a little bit of incentive. There are prizes involved. So I'm going to pick 3 people who fill out this survey who are going to get Seminary Dropout t-shirts, and I will mail them to you for free if you are in the continental U.S. So I would really appreciate it. It's only 10 questions long, and in fact, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the questions that are in there. So I've already got a few respondents already, and I'm only going to take 100, so I'm going to stop it at 100. So be sure to hurry and fill it out so you have a chance to win, and also to give me your feedback. I really want to hear what you think. So, for instance, the first question is going to be, let's see. Well, actually, the first question is, what's your name? And that's only so that I can figure out who to give the t-shirt to. So you can also give a Twitter handle or something like that if that works. The second question is, should the interview segments be shorter, longer, or about the same? So right now I've got about 91% saying that they want it the same. And I've got a little over 8% saying they want it to be longer, and no one said that they wanted it to be shorter, which is good. I'm going to take that as a compliment. I don't think that there's much of a chance of us going longer. I don't think that when all of you answer this survey, I don't think I'm going to see that there's a big demand for it to be longer. Simply because the whole podcast right now is about an hour long. So each interview is about 45 minutes, honestly. So, and it's just, that's a long time to keep people's attention. And I'm honored that people don't want it to be shorter, frankly. So that's the first question. The second question is, what do you like about the interview? And so I've gotten some great responses from that, some very kind things. What would you change about the interview? This is interesting. One of the responses that I got, and I really want to know if this is just the feeling of one person, then it's obviously valid no matter what. But if I hear from everyone that, yeah, we've all been thinking that, then that's something I really need to pay attention to. So this person said, tighter intro, not shorter, but tighter, i.e. better prepared, less fumbling for words. No offense. No offense taken. That's cool. I'm glad that this person said that, because the majority of podcasts have I don't want to say amateur, because that's kind of the most negative way to put it, but just a familiar, less polished, more honest feel to them. And for instance, like Cliff Ravenscraft, who I interviewed, I think he was like, I don't know, maybe Seminary Dropout number 8. I interviewed him. He does a podcast called The Podcast Answer Man. So on The Podcast Answer Man, he'll say something. He'll say, hold on, let me research that. He pushes pause. He researches it. He comes back, pushes the record button again. Obviously, as the listener, we're not waiting all that time because he presses pause. But the fact that he says, hold on, let me go research that, I'm going to press pause, that's a little different. You would never hear that on a radio program, which is highly polished. Frankly, I've been conflicted as to which way to go with that. Do I want my podcast to be like some of the podcasts that are out there that are truly radio programs first? You know, like your This American Lives, if you will. That's really a radio program that happens to fit the mold of a podcast really well. But most podcasts are, it's got that feel of I'm broadcasting from my mom's basement, and not in a bad way. So I've kind of struggled or been conflicted about which way I should go with that. And I feel like for the most part, it is pretty pretty highly polished, if you will. I've got the intro music and the segues and all that kind of stuff, and I do my best to be well prepared for the interviews. So this intro part, which you're listening to now, is kind of meant to be not off the cuff, but less rehearsed. And not as tight, to use the person's words that filled out the survey. So if you thought that too, yeah, I wish you weren't, fumbling so much. I wish you weren't, at a loss for words. It's ironic that I can't think of the right words when I'm trying to think of loss for words. If you thought that too, let me know. Put it in the survey as well. Or if you really like that part, no, Shane, like everything is really, the rest of it is really orchestrated. And I want to just kind of sit down and hear what your honest thoughts were that are not scripted. Tell me that too. Anyways, so that's something I've thought a lot about, and would really like your feedback on that. So, in the survey, when it says, what would you change about the interviews? You can take that to mean, what would you change about the podcast in general? And you can put those words in there. Next question that I'm concerned with: what's your gender? I've been really interested in this. So we've only had 12 people take the survey so far. So it's probably not a great picture of what the survey is going to look like, but I'm a little concerned right now because out of those 12, 10 are males, 2 are females. And I would really like for that to be not so lopsided. Just from my interactions with people who choose to speak to me on Twitter and Facebook and stuff like that, there's probably going to be more male listeners. But I want to change that. I only blame myself. So that's interesting. So right now, 83% of the people who took the survey are male. A little over 16% are female. The age category, that one's just kind of interesting. The biggest category that's represented so far is a 21 to 29 range, which is not surprising. After that, this is kind of surprising. The next one is 40 to 49, and then 30 to 39, and then 50 to 59. I'm 31, so I am in one of the lesser represented ranges, which is interesting to me. I wouldn't think that would be the case, but I'm happy to see it. Next, I ask you what your favorite episode is, who was interviewed at that time. That's all over the map. People have a lot of different answers. And then lastly, where did you hear about Seminary Dropout? Twitter by far is where most people have heard about it. And then some other ones, and I'll also ask for, at the very end, I ask for your recommendations of people you want to hear on Seminary Dropout. So I'd love to hear those. I will say some people who have already asked for some. One person said they only asked for 2 people, and they were Donna Miller and Cameron Strang. I hope I'm saying that right. I've asked both of them to be on the podcast, and they've turned me down. Now, I'll keep going for it. Especially for Donald Miller, because at some point he's going to be ready to promote a book. So I'll be ready to jump on that. I love both of those guys. Cameron, for those you don't know, is the founder of Relevant Magazine. And a while back, kind of when I was just getting started, I'd asked him for one, and he kind of responded on Twitter and just said, hey, sorry, there's too many things, too many opportunities, and I totally get that. So sorry, person who wanted those 2 that can't happen. The other thing was I had some people who wanted people who I already have had on the show. And luckily I knew who that person was on Twitter, and I said, I just want to make sure that I'm understanding you correctly. You want to hear these people? And he said, yeah. And I said, well, I've already had like 3 of them on the show. And he's like, I'm sorry, I've just started listening. And I told him that's totally cool. I just wanted to make sure I was understanding you correctly, and good news for you is that those interviews are out there. So that's the survey, 10 questions. It'll be super fast, and you could win yourself a Seminary Dropout t-shirt. So it won't change your life, but it'll change your wardrobe. I didn't actually script that. I just said that. Wasn't that cool? Okay. Well, I'm going to get to it because I've already talked too long. And as you know, my intros aren't very tight. So let's get on to this great interview. I'm so happy to have Christian Piatt, a podcasting pioneer, a veteran. And it was a really great interview. I had a lot of fun. I laughed a lot. And I think you're going to enjoy it. So here it is. My guest today is Christian Piatt. Christian is the author, editor, speaker, musician, and spoken word artist. He co-founded Milagro Christian Church in Pueblo, Colorado with his wife, Reverend Amy Piatt, in 2004. Currently, he serves as Director of Growth and Development for First Christian Church in Portland, Oregon. Christian is a creator and editor of several books, including the banned Question series and a memoir, PregMANcy. Christian is a blogger for Pathos. You may know Christian as a part of the podcast team at Homebrewed Christianity's CultureCast. Christian, thanks for joining me on the show today.
You bet, man. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. Well, I want to talk just a little bit about your background because I know, like myself, you were raised Southern Baptist, and I feel like that's probably shaped a lot of who you are now and a lot of work that you do. I find that story's pretty common where people grow up in a very conservative place and at some point cracks start to form in that. And I think the question that I want to ask most is why did you not fall away from God completely or permanently, if that makes sense?
Sure. Well, actually, I guess I did, but I came back. So when I grew up in a family where my father was effectively an atheist, and my mom was a Southern Baptist. So no surprise, ultimately I became a heretic. I was just splitting the difference, really. So, but I went to church partly because I wanted to spend time with my mom, and partly because she would take me for donuts, and I loved that. I was open to bribery. It worked for me. The church where I went as a kid was a pretty loving, welcoming kind of extended family. But as I got older, started to ask more questions. I was being taught in school, to think critically, to ask questions, to challenge existing ways of thinking, things like that. And then I go to church, and it was kind of the antithesis of that. And so I figured, well, one of these has to give, it seems. They don't coexist together very well. So I stuck with questioning, and they continued. My lines of questioning got more insistent and more in depth, I suppose, as I got older. And by the time I was 17, I think my youth minister just had enough. We were talking about salvation, and I challenged the notion that maybe my Jewish friends, who are incredibly faithful and came from the same Judaic, the same Abrahamic roots as I, maybe weren't going to hell, and maybe even my dad, as long as he was, at that point it was like, wow, he's a good person, or he's capable of love, so isn't that good enough? I've kind of worked on my understanding of salvation since then, but it basically, I was challenging his interpretation of Revelation. It challenged his idea of young Earth creationism, and he just had enough, and he raised this Bible over his head, and after a few choice words, he threw it at me and nearly hit me with it.
He literally threw it at you?
Oh yeah, hit the wall next to me, a big floppy King James, Southern Baptist edition Bible, so I left the faith, and I started to agree with what I was hearing from them, that I was dragging people down with me, and I was worse than an atheist or just a non-Christian at that point, because I was dragging people down the path of false doctrine, so to speak. So for 10 years, I didn't darken the door of a church at all. And I assumed I was, going to hell. I was unlovable by God and by anybody else, and, in the Christian sphere. Until I met my wife, who is a disciple of Christ, and was part of a small startup in Denver. They met in the round, and these people actually seemed to be more or less the same in church as they were outside of church. And after church, they go and have a dinner together and have a beer, God forbid, and not hide it under the table. I thought, wow, these people are real, and maybe there is a place, for me in that conversation. But it was actually music. When I finally shared some music during one of the early worship services there, it just broke me open. And I have to, my music, my art comes from somewhere very deep and vulnerable within me. And I just hadn't shared that in that context in so long. when I did, some of that scar tissue just kind of fell away, and something broke open inside me that has thankfully not ever closed back up again.
Um, Something that you don't talk about, or I don't hear you talk about a whole lot, is your position at your church there at First Christian Church in Portland. So you're the director of growth and development. We should say your wife is the senior minister there. What's your role there? What does that look like?
Well, she loves to say that she's my boss.
Sure, who wouldn't?
Right, yeah. But uh, it's a part-time gig, and I guess just because of my background in fundraising and nonprofit development, and also my connection in a number of circles to theologians, practitioners, authors, speakers, and the like. I have an opportunity to connect the congregation with people outside that might not otherwise, have a contact with the congregation. And I'm very interested in young adult ministry and blurring the lines between the sacred and the secular and that kind of a thing. So it was sort of a new approach to connecting with the world outside the doors. And it just seemed to work. Now, it's not always an easy road. I've been very close to not having the job anymore a few times, not of my own choice. But really, I see myself as a support role primarily for Amy, in trying to kind of help further the vision she has for the community. I love to preach, I love to teach and things like that, but she's got a real pastoral heart, and she's got a real passion for the church that I don't necessarily have as deeply in my DNA. She's a sixth generation disciple, fifth generation minister. I see religion as a means to an end, or a few ends. One, to deepening and hopefully challenging me to enrich and enliven my relationship with God and with other people, and to live out what I believe, to know what I believe, and then to try to live that out. In so much as organized religion helps me do that, I'm all for it. And in so much as it becomes a stumbling block, it either needs to be challenged and dismantled or abandoned. So I'm probably not. It's funny. A guy, an elder within the church, said one time. He said, "We're really grateful and excited to have you guys here, and we're especially glad that Amy is our senior pastor."
Kind of a pointed thing to say.
Yeah. No, I got it.
Message received.
That's right. Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about Culture Cast. You've been doing that for a couple of years now, right?
Yeah, we've been doing it about a year and a half now, I guess, since just after Wild Goose East 2 years ago. Met up with Trip Fuller at Wild Goose, and we've been friends for a while. I'd been on his show, Homebrewed Christianity, and we just got to talking about how I was thinking about getting back into podcasting. I'd played around with my own and everything. And he said, well, I guess he was inspired to start expanding the platform of Homebrewed, because he wanted to pursue a development of a progressive Christian channel on Stitcher.
Mm-hmm.
And they said, well, you've got to have at least 8 regular weekly shows producing original content in an area for it to be worthy of a channel.
Mm-hmm.
So he was looking to expand, and I said, hey, I'm moving up to Portland. I think it's kind of a cool cultural epicenter. It's also a fairly secular community, so it might be an interesting place to kind of explore those margins. And it turned out that Jordan Green was up here, and he actually lives less than a half a mile from where I am.
Oh, cool.
Here. And also Andy Campbell, who has been on the show quite a bit, lives half a mile in the other direction. So it just so happened that we all ended up living right in the same spot. And we're all big fans of the intersections of faith, popular culture, media, and talking a lot and having really strong opinions about things we don't really know that much about. So it's been great. It's kind of blown up, and it has a life of its own now, and it's actually kind of a semi-professional thing with sponsors and stuff. So I got to be careful now.
You can't say any old thing. I listen to your podcast, so I know you're not too careful.
Well, that's true. Irreverence is sort of our trademark, I
Yeah,
guess.
I was about to say, I think these sponsors know what they're signing up for.
Right. Yeah. Actually, we we had Phillips Theological Seminary just came on as a sponsor, and one of the things that they celebrate is the fact that they have a really strong women's theological education. And Jordan, of course, being the good old tried and true evangelical he is, he says, "So you mean they teach women's theological education to men? Because obviously the women cannot be, speaking and having an opinion in these things."
Right. The women's track is like a home ec sort of thing,
Right.
basically.
Yeah, exactly. How to be barefoot and pregnant for Jesus kind of thing. Yeah, right. So, I'm like, okay, there goes that sponsorship, but no.
I'm curious how being 2 years into that podcast, kind of how it inundates your thinking. I'm wondering if maybe before you saw a very stupid TV show on TV. That would be where a TV show goes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Where you might give that a deeper thought now, knowing that part of what you do is talk about that intersection. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And I think that that's common for writers in general, which I also do quite a bit of. Pastors as well. You get into this discipline of noticing and of looking at the world and your experience in it through a particular lens. And so for me, is not so much just an opportunistic, how can I exploit this into something that I can use on my blog or the show, but it's, um, is there any deeper metaphorical meaning to this? Is there anything redeeming about it? Is there anything challenging of traditional cultural norms? Is there any like funny anecdote from this experience that people might relate to? So you do kind of go through life kind of gathering these in your basket, and then you unpack those on Friday when you do the show or when you sit down to write a blog or a book or whatever. So I'm always collecting these kinds of tidbits from everything, and to the point that some people actually are paranoid about it. They're like, now if I say this to you, am I going to end up in one of your books? Um, so yeah, obviously there's a degree of respect for people's autonomy and privacy that you have to have, but yeah, definitely when I'm listening to songs, when I'm watching a new TV show, movies, those kinds of things, I'm definitely considering how this relates to my daily practice of writing and podcasting.
Do you feel like has media in general kind of gotten more sophisticated in the last 5 years, and thus maybe the application, the spiritual application, is not always so obvious? So, like, for instance, I'm thinking of things even 5 years ago, things like Lost, which you happen to have written a book about. Side question: how awesome is Lost? But very easy and very direct applications to spirituality there.
Mhm.
But then we've also had kind of the rise of like the anti-hero, and like I had a conversation with a friend of mine about Breaking Bad, which is also amazing. But it a lot harder to find redemption for the main character, and so there's plenty of spiritual applications there, but it's a little bit trickier. It's a little bit more subtle, I think, than media used to be. Is that fair?
Yeah, well, there are a couple of things there. One, just on Breaking Bad, one of the things that we talked so much on the Culture Cast about was the nature of sin, and just this idea that what Walter White started out doing in that show was something that was theoretically an act of selfless sacrifice. He
Mm-hmm.
was trying to do something, albeit illegal, to make sure that his family had security when he was gone. The reality is it turned into something way, way more nefarious and self-absorbed and toxic and dangerous and violent than that. But it was through very small self-justifications
Mm-hmm.
and justifications with other people that he drew into that circle that he got to that point. Sin, it was clear through that show that sin wasn't this little, if sin was as obvious as a little devil sitting on your shoulder with a pitchfork, it'd be a whole lot easier to avoid, right?
Mm.
But sin actually takes its most powerful, potent form through these small justifications that we make on a daily basis And so I think there are almost always universal themes like that you can find in any show. For example, House of Cards, Orange is the New Black. Those are a couple of new great shows that I really find a lot of rich material from. On the matter of media becoming more sophisticated, or even I would argue targeted, I think that's very much the case. In fact, we just recorded this morning our next culture cast, and we talked about how Netflix is able to do things like Orange is the New Black or House of Cards, which are shows that wouldn't have been produced on any other network. Or True Detective, which on HBO, which got passed on by every other network, or they wanted to radically change it, and HBO allowed it. These places where you have subscribers,
Mm-hmm.
and you can also cull a lot of data and information from the demographics and the watching habits of those subscribers that you have. You don't have to have a show like it used to be on the networks that would keep the average Joe's attention for 30 minutes and keep 25 million viewers. You may get 7 million really avid viewers, but if they're paying $10 a month or $15 a month, and you can do the sort of Nate Silver sabermetrics kind of data crunching on this and know within a few percentage points of variability what they will and won't watch before you even produce the show.
Yeah.
I said, how ununique does that make you feel that this show was produced with us in mind,
Yeah.
knowing that we would sit down and watch it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that's kind of mind blowing.
Like the money ballification of television, basically.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I wonder, and I know this is your show and I'm not supposed to ask the questions, but wondering kind of rhetorically speaking or just out loud, does that make us feel less unique and kind of used, manipulated? Or, of course, it's not as if we've not been manipulated by media in the past. Or is it kind of a great thing that we can actually get something that people know we will like and that it's kind of custom built for our experience? I don't know.
Yeah, I've wondered the same thing about, everybody talks about how terrible it is that Google and these other places take our information and have targeted ads toward us. And I should probably think more critically about it, honestly. But part of me just thinks like, man, I'd rather have the ad about something I'm interested in than a Miley Cyrus ad or something
Yeah,
like that. You know what I mean?
exactly. Yeah.
So yeah, it's a very good question. It probably should bother me more that I'm so easily pegged by these by these things.
Yeah.
But at some point, I'm kind of like, yeah, no, that really is who I am. You pegged me, you got me.
That's it. Well, it reminds me of the scene in Life of Brian, which is one of my favorite scenes of all times, when Brian, the guy who everybody thinks is Jesus or is the Son of God, so he comes out naked on his balcony, and there's all these people following him, and he's like, "God, you mindless sheep." He's like, "Go home, think for yourselves. You're all individuals." And they all say, "Yes, we're all individuals." And the one guy in the back says, "I'm not." I love
Yeah,
it.
it's a perfect illustration.
Yep, yep. It's beautiful. Yeah.
One of the things that I like about Culture Cast is that it's not just about True Detective or Iron and Wine or those kind of cultural things, but it's also, and I don't know if you recorded this one today or if you just published this one today, whichever one came out today,
Mhm.
you guys were talking about Russia and Crimea and about the legislation in Arizona and the legalization of marijuana and those kind of things. A lot of things that like, I don't know if you listen to Tony Campolo's podcast Across the Pond, but more of it's culture, but it's more of like current events rather than pop culture.
Right.
And so that's something I appreciate too. I'm wondering what draws you to those things, or are you not drawn to those things and you force yourself to pay attention to important things rather than just HBO?
No, no. I'm a kind of a culture and news junkie as it is. These are things I'm poring over on a daily basis anyway.
Yeah.
So I'm not really having to force myself to look over Huffington Post or BuzzFeed or New York Times online or something like that, because I'm doing that whether I have this show or not. So the luxury I have is getting to consume media and talk about media, whether that's entertainment or news or some hybrid of the two, that I'm interested in anyway. And I'm of a similar enough mind with the folks that are on the show, that it's just a lot of the conversations you hear, like sometimes when we're chatting about the items of what we're going to talk about on the show, these little conversations spark up, and my mantra is save it for the show.
Yeah.
Stop talking about this stuff now, because I want it to be fresh the first time we talk about it. And so it's stuff that we sit around and have a beer or have dinner and talk about anyway. And I hope that that's kind of the vibe that it gives off, is that you feel like it's kind of like inside the actor studio, or these shows where the comedians sit around a table and just kind of talk shop. Like you're getting kind of an insider perspective on a group of people that you relate to, and just talking and being real, but also helping you kind of process through some difficult stuff. Today, we talked about on the show that we recorded today, we talked about the Malaysian flight and the new information that's come out about that. Talked about the new study that came out about how Americans relate to and read the Bible. And then we went on from there to talk about child immunizations and all kinds of other stuff. So, yeah, we just kind of cover a broad spectrum, but things that we believe that people who would identify with us in sort of the culture, the bigger cultural tent of which we see ourselves being a part, would be resonating with, and be, I've been thinking about this, and nobody in the the faith sphere is necessarily talking about it, so let's talk about it.
I think one of the things I like about that most is I feel like your average pastor would we go to church and we talk about things like grace and love and all these great things, but rarely do we hear a pastor weigh in on the news items of the day, and maybe that shouldn't be for the pulpit, but I feel like unintentionally what it does is it kind of creates this it creates this kind of bifurcation between real world problems and the gospel, and God, and we kind of, I think unintentionally we get the idea that one has nothing to do with the other,
Right.
which is farther from the truth. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I think there is that sort of, I don't know if it's the right term for it, but cognitive dissonance, where we go in and we behave one way, and we listen to a sermon and we think, oh yes, that's really great, and then we go out and it really has no impact on our lives. Part of that is the challenge of a good pastor and a good educator, a good cultivator of discipleship and spiritual practices for people. But also part of it is in how we engage it. I think we have gotten into a habit of thinking about church as yet another product or service that we consume, and it meets a particular need in our daily life. I had somebody recently say, they had a critique of some of the theology of brokenness and imperfection that we talked about, and they said, I come to church to feel good. And I'm thinking, well, go to Disneyland, get a massage,
Right.
go on vacation, but that's not necessarily our job to kind of wipe all the yuck away so you can feel good enough to get through your next week. If that happens, that's great. But and the other thing is that the Christianity has, as a religious institution, as a cultural phenomenon, has tended to take popular culture, especially since the 80s, when the contemporary Christian movement kind of took hold and started deciding that reflecting the culture outside was a way that we were going to use as an attraction to get people in.
Yeah.
It wasn't necessarily engaging the substance of it or the real quality, the things demanded of you to produce something of great quality. It was really more just the superficial bells and whistles overlaid on top of it.
Yeah.
It was a co-opting of cultural trends to still achieve the same desired end. And so there was really no mutuality, no reciprocity at all.
Yeah.
And so we believe it should be more fluid than that, if that makes sense. I want to be informed and affected by my culture. Not to say that therefore every vicissitude and every way the wind blows in the cultural landscape affects my understanding of God, but certainly if I'm a part of the world, if I'm really a part of, if I'm allowing the world to inform my understanding of reality and life and other people, then it should affect me, and I should stop and think critically about it and engage it on a really deep level. So I hope that we do that on the show. I hope that we get people to maybe stop and look at the media that they consume a little differently and start looking for these themes that actually they can take into church, or that they get from church that they can take out into watching Breaking Bad or whatever,
Yeah.
into the rest of their life.
I think too that if our local context, like if my pastor or my church leaders or those that I'm in fellowship with are not speaking to those issues, I feel like we often default to what is Focus on the Family say I'm supposed to believe about X, or what does Pat Robertson say I'm supposed to believe about X.
Right.
And instead of thinking critically about those things, there's also stuff that happens that to us looks more morally ambiguous. And some of the things we talked about, I form an opinion pretty quickly when I hear those things on the news. But things like the uprisings in countries in the Middle East, it's a lot more ambiguous. It's a lot harder to get hard facts and to form an opinion about that. And so it's helpful when other Christians like yourself, like Tony Campolo, like those people kind of parse out here's what's going on here, and here's how here's at least how I feel about this as a believer.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the biggest challenges, I think, of mainline, progressive, emergent Christianity, whatever you want to call it, is that there's a lot of coexistence of multiple truths and caveats and, well, it depends and things like that. It doesn't make for a very attractive soundbite. Whereas Pat Robertson will give you a doozy. It may be completely off the rocker, off the charts, insane, but it's going to be quotable. Driscoll may say something incredibly hateful and violent toward women, but you can capture it in a headline. And we're not as good at that. We are not as media savvy when it comes to that, and partly because we tend to approach things in a more nuanced kind of postmodern, if you will, kind of approach to reality, that things can't be boiled down to that sort of dichotomous black, white, either or sort of way of thinking, which I think is a dying phenomenon anyway. But because it's so attractive and quotable, and it's like red meat in the media, it still has a lot more power than the nuanced, thoughtful, let's sit back and really reflect on this and have a thoughtful debate about it kind of a thing.
I think as humans we're kind of drawn to certainty. Like certainty is very appealing. So when a Mark Driscoll can say, here are these very clearly drawn lines, and I am certain about that, then there's something attractive about that. Yeah, I'm not one to believe that there is no truth, or that there is no right and wrong, but I certainly believe that it can be hard from our human vantage point to see what that is all the time. And the facts are often much more subtle and much more ambiguous than a lot of people would have us believe.
Absolutely, and actually, in a book I just finished for Jericho, which comes out next in August, called postChristian, I write about the different scandals of Christianity and then counter those with Christ-like virtues. And one of the scandals of Christianity that I dedicated an entire chapter to is the Christian scandal of certainty. And that the opposite of faith is not doubt, but it's certainty.
Mm-hmm.
And I've written a piece. I wrote a piece a while back called "It's Not About the Problem Isn't God, the Problem is Certainty." It is not religion in and of itself that has led to so much violence and problems in the world. It's when we idolize our certitude about certain ideals that ideology becomes the thing we worship more than the humanity of the people next to us.
Mm-hmm.
And then it gives us the opportunity, the vehicle to dehumanize and otherize people and draw those divisions across which then we fight and justify any number of violent acts. But there is actually a physiological thing that happens in our brains when a prediction that we make is reinforced. When we get to a place of apparent certitude about something, there's like a dopamine release in our brains. So we can actually literally physiologically get addicted to being reassured and certain that we are right about things.
Yeah, absolutely. I just interviewed Christina Cleveland not too long ago about her book. I can't think of what it's called. Something about Something about division. Anyways,
No.
but that we talked about that phenomenon of how when we spend time with people who only believe what we believe, then we're constantly having our own opinions confirmed, and then it also builds up this belief that anyone who doesn't believe that is crazy.
Sure. And there is a growing phenomenon of that ideological polarization across the North American, the United States landscape. There's a book, that Jordan talks about on the show a lot lately called American Nations, and it talks about basically how we're divided into like 9 different cultural nations,
Yeah.
modularized within the United States. And the fact is that as we can continue to custom tailor the media, the news, the entertainment that we get, and we have the technology to communicate with and actually physically relocate to be close to those people who think and act and have values similar to ours already, we continue to more deeply entrench our existing values and understandings and truths, which actually just kind of draws us further and further apart. And we have to actually go out of our way to challenge our pre-existing notions of how the world works.
Absolutely. There's a reason that politics is geographical, because we're surrounded by people who teach us what to think, and then everyone else reinforces that all around us.
Right.
So good. Okay, I want to transition a little bit and talk about some of the books that you've written. You had one just came out in January that was part of the Banned Questions series that you edit and write for, and that one was Banned Questions about Christians. Is that right?
Yes.
Did I get that right? Okay.
Yep.
Talk about what draws you to that topic of things that are taboo. I would think probably the story that you told at the beginning about not being able to ask questions.
That's exactly it. Yeah, I resolved when I stepped away from church, and when I even remotely considered, going back into any system of organized religion, that it would have to be one that would not just tolerate my questions, but that would actually welcome and celebrate them, and where questioning could actually be the foundation of discipleship and spiritual practice and study. And so, within Disciples of Christ, I have found that for the most part to be the case. It isn't perfect, but neither is family, neither is marriage. None of those other institutions that we've got are necessarily perfect. It's whether or not, on the whole, it's worth it, and I do think it is, because I love the opportunity. Like, I teach a class based on the Banned Questions books every week in our church. We'll have 15, 20 people come, and we have the most dynamic conversations. We'll just pick one of those questions. We read it, and then I've always got more than one response. I don't call them answers, although I think they formatted it that way in the book of Q and A. It's really more of a Q and R. It's a question and response, because I purposely have multiple responses so people have to think for themselves and decide on their own what they believe, which I think is something that there's a lot of permission giving there. One, for people that know you're not an evil person, you're not unworthy of calling yourself a Christian or being a part of a religious community just because you have these doubts and questions. Mm-hmm. And 2, there can be more than one right answer, so to speak, and that it's okay that, and I say, this was actually a time-tested tradition of biblical interpretation and debate back in the times of of ancient Judaism. It was called midrash, and they would argue about the meanings of texts, and the multiple truths and multiple perspectives on it would be revealed through that process, and they trusted that. But we got, in our sort of modernist mindset, into this idea that there was a truth to be gained from it and nothing else, and everything else had to be perseverated from that. So I'm trying to reclaim sort of that ancient practice of midrash, I guess, through a more contemporary structure in the Banned Questions books.
You're undertaking your first work of fiction right now, Blood Doctrine. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, there are a couple of interesting things about it. I wrote the original draft of that book a few years ago, and really along the way, as I finally settled on a literary agent and publishing various houses or whatever, kind of the question that comes up is, are you a fiction writer or are you a nonfiction writer? And for me, I've always said if I have to choose, I'm going to choose nonfiction, partly because that's just in my wheelhouse. That's what people know me for. But it's also, I find it to be more natural, and I get to engage the culture in real time, kind of like what we're talking about that
Mm-hmm.
you value in the Culture Cast. I love that. And so I kind of sidelined the book, but I brought it back to my agent recently, and she said, I think given the fact that you just signed this deal with Jericho to do a book with them, it's coming out in hardback. It's gonna be kind of a big deal. I think presenting this to another publisher at this point may confuse your brand. I said, so do I just need to shelve it and just put it back on the shelf and forget about it? She said, well, you could self-publish. And I really, I'd never thought of that. So, long story short, we ended up doing this Kickstarter campaign and raising all the money I needed to do a full professional publishing job on it. Frank Schaefer edited it. We're going through, copy edits and proofing now. We've got the cover design, got a sales and distribution team. I got a wonderful publicist. We got a marketing budget. I mean, it's amazing. So it's been an incredible learning experience for me, and it's also sort of a touchstone for me on how things are shifting in media and publishing today,
Yeah.
because they're changing everywhere. And the fact that this can happen, the fact that this is possible, is a little daunting, but it's also kind of exhilarating. Now, as far as the actual topic of the book, it's a sort of a high concept what if kind of a thing. People have joked that it's Michael Crichton meets Dan Brown or something. The idea is that some physical remains, genetic information that it can be shown to be from the body of Jesus is found amplified genomically and injected into a fertilized egg, and this surrogate carries it to term, and this child is born. Basically, all of this is part of this conspiracy group called the Project, which is trying to hasten the second coming, the Armageddon, basically, by resurrecting Jesus, so to speak. So it's this convergence of the Jesus tomb and all these relics, which people claim to have some physical connection to Jesus. Our need for that, the clash of religion and science, the questions of the morality of cloning and things like that. Into this sort of tightly packed suspense thriller kind of a model that I think is going to be a lot of fun.
So, and based on just our previous conversation, I'm going to assume that this is not just going to be fun action thriller, but some fairly deep stuff, some meat that we can glean from it and take from it.
I think so. Yeah. The book actually takes place in three different scenes that kind of interweave like a braid, and one of the three contexts is it starts with Jesus' crucifixion. And it goes from there, and it follows this sort of theoretical, imagined scenario where one of Jesus' brothers and Mary Magdalene end up going out and spending time with the Essenes in the caves of Qumran. They learn that he actually spent a lot of time there, and he was discipled there, and he learned a lot of his Messiah tricks there, so to speak. And so there's a whole lot there about the nature of what made Jesus Jesus. Was that a unique experience only to him? And what did the people around Jesus? What was their experience? So I think that's that's one piece, and also it deals with this kind of idea of what would someone do, like this teenage boy who doesn't even really realize who he is, and these weird things start happening to him. What would we do if we realized we had a mantle like this? How would we respond to it? And so, I think it deals with some fairly deep questions, although certainly not. It is not Christian literature in that it sets the agenda and then molds the entire story to fulfill that propaganda that they want, shared at the end. I showed it to a couple of Christian publishers, and they said, well, there are a number of things in here that would keep us from being able to even touch this. So if it has any big liability, it's going to be that it's too Christian for mainstream market and too mainstream for Christian market. But we'll see. So
very cool. So the last thing I want to talk about is PregMANcy, which was kind of a memoir of sorts. Before that, I'm going to plug this book that you did the forward for. And it's, I'm just going to say it's going to be self-serving because I contributed to this book as well. But Father Factor, which you wrote the forward for. Tell me a little bit about that's going to come out in October, I believe, is when it's slated to come out this year. Tell me about like your contribution to that. You've obviously had a lot to say on the issue of fatherhood because you wrote your memoir based around it. So tell me a little bit about it.
Well, I got involved with that particular project because I'm good friends with Andy Campbell.
Yeah.
I love his writing, and I respect his mind, his heart. I think he's just a really great person. And I try to help, celebrate his voice in the conversation as much as I can. And he just asked me. He said, "Hey, at first he had asked me to contribute." And then we realized that the essays were supposed to be from people under 40, and I am 42. So I got kicked off the project for being too
that's
old.
That's ageist, isn't it?
I know, isn't it? I gave him so much crap about that. But I said, I understand. But like that was the first time I'd ever been disqualified for something for being too old, And I was like, that sucks, man. But then he came back later and said, "Hey, would you consider doing the forward?" And I said, absolutely, I would love to. So really it was about framing the conversation, with the subsequent essays by kind of sort of laying out there my understanding of postmodern fatherhood, postmodern male identity, and how those intertwine and wrestle with postmodern faith. All of which share some common dynamics, I think. And we are still trying to figure that out. I think one of the most interesting things about male identity in the 21st century is you could argue that on the female gender side of things, that it's been to some degree a process of addition, of gaining new opportunities, gaining new voice, and things like that. So for those of us who have had the privilege, who have been at the center and the core of power, of social power, that has taken either some compromise or accession or what have you to make that space. And so if we are not the big dogs in the room, if we are not the ones in charge, if we are in fact co-equals, then what makes us male? What makes us men? What makes us fathers? If my wife actually knows more about the nickel defense than I do, am I not a good father? Or if I cook with my kids and she, goes out and plays golf with them or whatever, hypothetical kind of stuff like that.
Sure.
How does that affect who I am, or does that even matter anymore?
Yeah.
And so exploring that, I think, is a worthwhile and valuable conversation to have.
That's interesting. It seems like we have found out that maybe some of the old metrics that we use to determine whether or not someone was a good father, we've decided that those are bad metrics.
Right.
But what do we replace them with? Does it mean we don't have to be good fathers and good men and that kind of thing? So fascinating. I'm looking forward to reading your forward for that one. So last thing I want to talk about, PregMANcy. You came out with that in 2012. It was kind of about having your second kid. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah, Zoe. Yeah.
What did you think you had there that was worth telling the story about?
I wrote it at first just as my own catharsis, my own therapy, to keep myself sane through the process of that second child coming along. Amy had struggled with pretty severe postpartum depression through the first pregnancy. Matthias, my son, who was our first child, is an amazing kid. I mean, he's brilliant. He's a prodigy. He just, he's really remarkable. He's smarter than either one of us. But he's also on the autism spectrum, on the high end of the autism spectrum. So he's a lot to handle. And he also happens to push a lot of the old triggers that I've got left over from my relationship with my dad, which was not perfect. Like, he and I haven't spoken in maybe 10 years now, or maybe 7 years. And so it's really hard when you feel like you're doing a relatively piss poor job of being a dad to one child to think, oh, I'm going to try this again. That seems close to insane, if not completely outright stupid. So I was writing this down, and as I shared it with a few friends, they said, "Oh man, I have never heard anybody talk about fatherhood this way. I wish I had had this when, I was going through this myself. I wish I had known I wasn't the only one who thought this way or felt this way or whatever." So I just happened to, everything I'd done up to that point was more of a traditional nonfiction reflection or commentary kind of a thing. So this was a departure, but I presented it to Chalice Press, who had published all my books up to that point. Said, "Hey, what do you think?" And surprisingly, they loved it, and so we put it out. It's it's still kind of a niche book. I think it has a broader appeal than some people might think based on the title and everything. Some people think it's like a parenting guide or only for guys who are about to have babies. I think if anybody who is trying to discern that, what does it mean to be a man, what does it mean to be a father, to be a husband, will find pieces of this story that are profoundly relatable, hopefully cathartic and funny, and worth a read. So.
Very cool. Well, Christian, I feel like we could literally talk all day because you have got your hands in so many things. And it seems like every time I felt like I wrapped my mind around what you did, it was like I discovered something new. Oh, he does spoken word poetry as well. We don't even get to talk about that today. But I'm so glad that you were able to join me. It's such a privilege to talk with you. And anything you want to share before we go?
No, I would just welcome people to check out the Homebrewed Christianity Culture Cast if they don't already. We've got a Facebook fan page. You can go to Homebrewed Christianity and subscribe there for free. We do have a new show that I believe is launching today with its first 5 or 6 episodes called Angels Share, which is about we talk all things brewed and distilled. So a drinking podcast. Work. So that's coming out, and I encourage people who are interested in home brewing, distilling, learning more about bourbon, beer, and the whole process and everything to check that out. It's kind of a fun little show. And then just hit me up at ChristianPiatt.com. You can find all my links to everything I do there. So thanks a lot, man.
Very cool. We will obviously have all the links to everything you just mentioned on the show notes, so be sure to check those out on the blog. Christian, thanks so much for joining me today.
You bet. I appreciate it. Hope to do it again.
I had a great time talking with Christian. Remember, you can find everything that we talked about on the show notes for the show. That can be at seminarydropout.com, of course. Also, ShaneBlackshear.com/Piatt. As in Christian Piatt, if you want to go straight there. Hey, I want to give a short little plug this week to a little podcast called Sermonsmith. If you're a pastor or interested in public speaking, you'll especially want to check out this podcast. It's hosted by my friend John Chandler. And like I said, the podcast is called Sermonsmith, all one word, just like it sounds. And he interviews pastors about their sermon preparation, delivery, resources, everything that they use. It's completely fascinating, and you should definitely go check it out on iTunes or online at sermonsmith.com. Go check it out. You'll love it. Speaking of podcasts, have you rated or reviewed and or subscribed to Seminary Dropout in iTunes? Remember, I greatly appreciate it. It helps keep the podcast front and center. And you never know when I'm going to have a contest based on those 3 things: rating, reviewing, subscribing to the podcast in iTunes. It means a whole lot to me. Last week, I had somebody on Twitter ask me what the song was that we closed out the show with, the episode with Brooksy Cavey. It's the same song that's playing right now. It's called There's Still Hope by D.L. Rossi. You can find that on iTunes, and you can find him online and on Twitter and, all the right places. I want to say thanks to D.L. Rossi for letting me use his music royalty-free. I can't believe I get to use such quality music. It's so good. So go check him out online. Thank you again, D.L. Rossi. Okay, I'll see you all next time. Take care.
For a woman to watch her, and to lust for things I know aren't mine. But there's still hope for me. This grace that I've received. You've loved your enemy, and you turn the other cheek, so I could live, oh live, so I could live, oh live. If the church is not a steeple, but in fact it is your people, then this